For those of you who don't know me, my name is Melissa Stewart. I am the Senior Executive Director with the Texas Restaurant Association. I'm based out of Houston, and I've been with the organization almost 9 years, and it's absolutely my pleasure. I tend to be the person that we go to talk about immigration in our organization because it's a passion project for me, and for a couple of reasons. And one of them is right there is Al Flores. He and I did some stuff together, and it just really, I'm like, oh, that's so important. And I can think, I can look at my family, and we're just a couple of 3 generations here. And if my grandfather hadn't had the opportunity to open his grocery store and come and do all the fun things he did, then we wouldn't be here today. But then the other half of that is I live in Houston. Houston's our most diverse city in America, and we absolutely would not be the community we are without our immigrant population. We are the culinary capital of the South, which I love, but I can assure you we would not be that if we had not had all our friends from Mexico and South America and Africa and Vietnam and China. Like, what makes us delicious is all of our flavors that come together. And we're about 25% across the city of foreign-born citizens, and it's just wonderful. Y'all are here today because you probably had to close your shop because you didn't have anybody to work, and we needed some workers. And what we want to talk about today, we're going to sort of hit it on some different levels, but we know across the workforce, we give or take about 23.5% here in Texas of our hospitality workforce is foreign-born. And I think a lot of people who don't study this issue, you immediately think, oh, well, that's going to be all the dishwashers and housekeepers. That's absolutely not true. This is owners, chefs, innovators, tech people. It is up and down the line of every job you can think of in our industry is being met and filled by our folks who join us from across the world, and we are still the place so many of them want to be. I'll let each of my speakers give you their personal favorite introduction, because otherwise I'm going to read off a list and they're going to be like, oh, I can't believe that's still on my bio, and like I always do. We're going to start right here with my friend Zaria. She's with us from Forward US. She's based in Austin, and I'll let her tell a little bit about her organization, and then after that I'll introduce our next gentleman.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you. I'm really excited to be here with everyone today, and it's such a cool event just to see everyone gathered, and this is such a critical industry to the state of Texas. So as Melissa mentioned, my name is Zaira Garcia, and I am the Texas Director at Forward.us. Forward is a national organization. I have the privilege of running our work in the state of Texas, and as a Texan, I feel like it's the most important state in the entire country. But for us at Forward, we are a bipartisan political advocacy group. We are fighting for policies that keep the American dream achievable in a 21st century knowledge economy. And so the 2 issues that we work on at the moment to pursue that goal are immigration and criminal justice reform. I'm part of the immigration team, and our work here in Texas, the bulk of it is in the immigration space. And that's just because it's such an important issue in the state of Texas. We are home to the 2nd largest immigrant or foreign-born population in the entire country, with almost over 4.9 million immigrants. And so for us and for me, it's really important that we tell that story. I'm really excited to be here with Jacob Monty and with Al Flores because they've seen this issue firsthand and really get to understand the ins and outs of it. But for us at Forward, when we talk about immigration reform, we know that that issue is always in the news, and it seems extremely complex, and there's so many different levels to it. But when we think about our immigration system at Forward, we can really boil it down to 3 pillars. We can all agree, and most people would agree, we want to be as safe as possible. And we want sensible border enforcement to be able to track who comes in and out of our country, right? That is a point that most of us can agree to. But that needs to be coupled with our 2nd pillar, which we really believe is critical to our workforce, to our economy, to our communities, and that's finding a pathway for those who are here, are contributing, and just have no way of getting right with the law to be able to do so. This idea that there's a line to stand in, or that folks are choosing not to follow the law, is just not true. The reality of it is that we haven't seriously updated our immigration laws in over 3 decades. At this point, that's 30 years. Our world looks significantly different. Since then, we have the creation of social media, which has really revolutionized the way that we are in community with each other and the way that industries tackle their businesses, their workforce, right? And so we can really even think of technology simply. Before, I think our immigration system we didn't have smartphones. Think about how much our world has changed, and yet we think that the immigration laws that currently exist are going to help us meet the needs that we have today, and that's just not reasonable. And so for us, it's really important and a priority to help push for a pathway for folks to have the opportunity to adjust their status. And then our third pillar is really more forward-facing, no pun intended there, but it's about modernizing our immigration system so that it does meet today's needs and that we aren't talking about this 30 years down the line about having an immigration system that no longer meets the needs of the industries. We really need to be able to think through how do we process our immigration applications right. Jacob Monty can probably speak to this a lot more, but our immigration system is impossible to navigate at times. It is very limited. It does not give business owners the opportunity to tap into folks who want to be able to come and work here at a time when we have a really severe labor shortage crisis. And so that third pillar for us is really how do we account for that and create opportunity to grow as our world shifts and our needs shift. And so I'm really excited to talk about that today, but I'll kick it over to Al Flores to introduce himself.
Al?
Great, so my name is Al Flores. I'm the general counsel for a restaurant chain called Gringo's Mexican Kitchen and Jimmy Chung's in the greater Houston area. And of our approximately 2,500 employees, almost a quarter of those folks are either DACA recipients or have family members that are DACA recipients. So we know how important it is for those folks in our workforce, and they're in every facet of the business, whether the front of the house, back of the house, managers, shift leaders, in every aspect. And so many of them own homes, pay taxes, support schools, and work hard. But as has been said earlier, unfortunately, in the limbo they've been in for so many years now, even though we're celebrating 10 years of DACA, the anniversary of 10 years, in essence, they've been in limbo. And unfortunately, they continue to be in limbo. But nonetheless, we need that labor. We need those folks. They're great contributors to our community. And we look forward to discussing a little bit more about it.
Thanks, Al.
Jacob?
Hello, I'm Jacob Monty. I've been coming to this show for over 20 years, and there's always been hope of immigration reform, right? It's coming. It's just around the corner. Congress is going to get together. We were excited when in 2001, it seemed like there was opportunity for bipartisan compromise, and then 9/11 happened, and that kind of derailed everything. But yeah, it hasn't happened yet, folks, and I'm going to give you all some tips to navigate the current system that doesn't include immigration reform. I do want to address the two myths that Ms. Garcia mentioned. One is that people are choosing to be undocumented. You know, there is no line to get into. If you entered without inspection, even if you marry a U.S. citizen, you're stuck. You can't regularize your status. Every week we get called upon by companies that say, Jake, we need your help. We don't care what it costs. We have a superintendent, we have a GM. Just, you know, if it's 10,000, 20,000, you know, just fix them. You know, this is the only problem in America that you can't throw money at and the problem goes away. That creates a lot of issues because there's unscrupulous lawyers and notarios. By the way, a notario is a lawyer in Mexico. A notario here in the US is a notary public. And there's some unscrupulous folks that capitalize on that similarity in name, and they charge people outrageous sums to fix their status, but nothing can be done. So, you know, for so many people, most of the people, there is no way to get in line or fix their status. The other equally wrong myth is the myth that there is a system for employers to use. You know, why don't you just use the J visa or the H-2B visa? And a lot of times employers think that maybe they didn't get the right information. You know, those two visa categories don't really help our restaurant industry. The J visa might work for some people in fine dining, but even then it's very cumbersome. It's a limited amount of months that they can work with the restaurant. The J visa doesn't really work. The H-2B is limited to seasonal needs. You know, if you're in Galveston, it might work. We do a lot of work in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. You know, that it works there. It doesn't work in Texas. So, you know, there is no immigration visa category for restaurants, unfortunately, and you know that we just got to deal with the current state of the law. We've come up with what to do, and we'll talk about that more, but essentially it's don't ask, don't tell. Don't ask more than you need to know, because then you have knowledge, but if they have documents that appear genuine on their face, accept them and put them to work. But it puts employers in a very delicate situation, because if you learn too much information about Juan, you know, and he confides in you, presto, you have to terminate him. So you have to navigate that line between being a good employer, wanting to be there for your employee, but understand you have to have your preset warning ready. Hey, I'm here for you, but please don't tell me anything different from the payroll information, because I'm going to have to act on it. And it's tough, and it breaks. It's heartbreaking. So I look forward to the panel.
I'd like to, Al, if you could just share with us, you work with Gringo's Chimichangas and a couple of other fantastic brands that Russell's going to get mad at me for not knowing the name, Lucha Libre. But could you just tell us about how many dreamers y'all have in y'all's group, and kind of what it's been like for them over the last 6 years? Because we know it's gotten really tough, because these, not only is DACA going on much longer than we expected, but it's had some hiccups and some kind of step back. So could you talk to us about your team and what you're seeing on the front lines with these folks?
Sure. First of all, it's Burger Libre, and the Lunchbox is the other Burger Libre.
All right. Sorry, Russell.
But can you imagine being in a hospital, in a coma state in a hospital, and you relying on your doctors and the hospital administration to determine when to revive you? And years later, the hospital gets sold, and another group of doctors come in and say, well, we have to wait till the next hospital administration policy gets devised to determine when we're going to revive you. That's kind of what a lot of these dreamers have gone through, for all intents and purposes. And they finally were revived in June 15th of 2012, when the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals came to be through President Obama. And so, unfortunately, 6 years into that, a challenge took place by the state of Texas and 9 other states, and put those folks right back in that hospital room, put them right back in that sense of limbo, if you will, not knowing what's going to happen. And again, in one particular case I can share with you, this young lady, Lisette, got here when she was 6 months old from Monterrey, Mexico. And her first ride on a swing was in a park called Mason Park in Houston, Texas. Her first experience with a formal educator was in an elementary school called Freeman Elementary. And all through her career, through high school in Pasadena High School, she was taught that the American dream is something you strive for, you work hard for, and you do everything you need to do, follow the rules, to be able to realize that American dream. And so she did just that. She worked hard, she got wonderful grades, and just in this past May, she graduated with a degree in health and science from the University of Texas, top of her class. She's starting her second degree as a nurse. Her goal is to become an inpatient healthcare provider in emergency rooms. And so throughout this time, though, she's had to work because she's not eligible for any kind of federal assistance. She's worked full-time, she's gone to school full-time, she's contributed. Her family have bought a home, they've paid taxes. Those property taxes support the school system. So these arguments that, you know, they're a drain on resources in Texas are really not true. At the end of the day, these folks in Houston alone, over the 60,000 DACA recipients, contribute more than $250 million in taxes in the Houston area alone, over $1 billion in spending power. So, you know, getting to work with her and other folks just like her has really brought home to me the importance of communicating to our elected officials the need to provide the path to citizenship for those individuals. Russell's given me the opportunity to help some of these folks over the years, and I never wanted to do immigration. To me, it was like family law. I wanted to stay out of that. But when I went to my first swearing-in ceremony, and I sat there and I listened to I saw the shining faces throughout the auditorium, and when that judge swore everybody to an oath to the allegiance to the United States of America, it brought home how important it is to become a United States citizen. Something, frankly, I've taken for granted all my life because I lived here. Okay, I was born in Lake Charles. Some people think that might not be part of the United States, but it is. But all my life I've taken for granted that. And then when I went to my first swearing-in ceremony, it really changed my whole perception of how important it is not only to help these individuals, but to work with our elected officials to try to find some kind of reasonable change to immigration policy and provide a path to citizenship, particularly for these DACA students.
Thank you, Al. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we see in all of our restaurants. We have fantastic folks that are doing great work, and we want them to be able to stay. We want them to be able to stay safely and make those investments in family and homes and maybe their own business, which is really a nice opportunity, because we know that restaurants are one of the great entrepreneurial options that we have. I'm going to turn it to you and just maybe can you give us just a few more numbers and facts? How many people are we talking about? What are we talking about money-wise?
Yeah.
Because we want to talk about how we're going to get them into, how we can increase your workforce under the umbrella of immigrants and our immigrant works.
Yeah, for sure. I actually want to start with DACA since I'll share that story, but DACA right now is under serious threat. It's actually playing out in the court system and could go away as soon as this fall. And so what that is not only terrifying for folks who are DACA recipients themselves, but it is also pretty terrifying to employers, because DACA recipients are a really critical part of our Texas workforce. When we're talking about numbers, if DACA were to go away, just say the impact in Texas would lose about $8 billion in annual GDP. And we're talking about $78 million in annual state and local taxes. And so these folks are contributing, and this is something that could really impact all of us, not just folks who are directly impacted themselves. But really, when you look at the picture of our workforce in Texas, we recently issued a study, which I believe we've shared with TRA and is on a lot of their social media content, but 24% of our workforce in Texas is foreign-born. In the restaurant industry specifically, when we're talking about food and service workers, about a quarter of the industry is foreign-born. When you think about also just in terms of supply chain challenges that we've experienced, as recent as this year, 42%, almost half of workers in meat processing are foreign-born. When we're talking about having delays in produce or having delays and not being able to run our businesses, not even because of the workforce shortage, but because of the supply chain issues, we are talking about the need for immigration reform. And so really, those are kind of the numbers that really paint that picture. In terms of the story that Alflora shared, I will say in Texas, we have over 100,000 DACA recipients. And most DACA recipients, there's this story of children people who came here as children, but these folks are grown now. They are in their 30s, they are buying homes, they are building families, and they are a critical part of our workforce. We're in Dallas now, so in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we have over 30,000 DACA recipients just in this region. And so when you think about what ending a program like that would do without any legislative solution in place, we're talking about in a single moment pulling all of those folks out of the workforce. And so it's a really scary picture when we think about the numbers.
Absolutely. And so we know that it's a big deal. We know it's a big opportunity. But now what we want to know is how, as employers, are we able to best tap into this workforce and make them as safe and make your business as safe as possible? Because we know it's a two-way street. It's not all about one thing or the other. And so, Jacob, could you just give us some enlightening? Jacob and his team represents employers all across the United States. And they've really done a brilliant job, and they're a true friend to our industry because They help us understand that what is the role of the employer and what isn't, that, right? That's the other half of it, like what don't we need to do? So Jacob, could you just walk us through some of the best tips and practices that you would want everyone to know so that we can tap into this workforce?
Sure. Let me just say, it's hard to know how many DACA beneficiaries are in your industry because a lot of times they're not going to tell you that they're DACA, but on their work authority document, if you look at it, it says code. If it says code 33, that means that they're DACA. So, you might think, well, I don't have any DACA because they didn't tell me. You have DACA. They're everywhere. I mean, they're there. They're vital to the economy. We need a solution. And let me just say that Forward has done a great job of crafting a bipartisan group of team members for it. We need more Republicans on board with DACA. So, I hate to turn this into a plea for asking for political help, but we do need more reasonable Republicans on board. And folks, they're out there. They just got to hear from you all to tell them that it's important. So now let's back to the programming. Look, it's very difficult because the law that the last immigration reform we had was in '86. That law legalized about 3 million people. It also gave us the I-9. The I-9 has been around for 35 years now. Employers are still getting it wrong. It's a 2-page document. It requires that you as the employer swear under penalty of perjury that you look at original documents and that verify the person's identity and eligibility to work. You're not document experts. That is very clear. In fact, you can get in trouble if you doubt a document to be valid and it turns out to be valid. You can end up in a terrible discrimination problem by doubting a document you think is not valid. If it turns out to actually be valid, you have a problem there. Employers also have to accept 32 different types of document. You can't tell the employee, hey, I want a federal document. That would be document abuse and you get in trouble. So remember that. The employee gets to determine which of the 32 different documents they want to present. It sounds like that it's very ambiguous, but that ambiguity helps employers right now when there is no immigration reform. You can legitimately say, hey, I'm not a document expert. I'm going to avoid the documents that appear on the Hall of Shame, of course. And let me just talk about those briefly. Misspellings on the document. Texas is not spelled with a J. We've actually seen some of those documents. And that really comes to the heart of the question. Jake, what document should I accept? Look, if you look at a document and it doesn't look like the person in front of you, you can't use that document to hire the employee for I-9 purposes. If you look at the document and there's misspellings on it, if person is misspelled, if you have two people in one photo, if you have the glamour shot DPS photo like this, that's an indication the document is bad. Now the good news is the document vendors we have in Texas are very good. None of these examples came from Texas. So bottom line is, as long as you're not hiring folks with documents that look like the Hall of Shame, you're going to be all right, as long as you don't learn too much about your employees. And you have to be careful there. We've seen situations where your insurance provider will tell you stuff because you've listed people as drivers of company vehicles, and they'll come back and tell you, hey, Jose doesn't have a valid driver's license number. Be careful because you could find out information about their immigration status indirectly from another source. And you just have to be careful. Again, it's analogous to the don't ask, don't tell policy that we had in the 90s regarding gays in the military. As long as you don't ask about it, as long as you don't see it, give them a gun and send them to the front. Same thing with hiring in our industry. As long as you don't know that they're undocumented, as long as the documents don't appear on the Hall of Shame, generally you can put them to work and you're going to be fine. We are seeing more enforcement, I-9 audits, so you do have to make sure your I-9s are completed properly, otherwise you can be fined. We did get some good news from the Biden administration. Social Security no-match notices aren't issued anymore. That was causing a lot of folks in our industry a lot of problems because we were getting multiple notices every year and the same people were on the list. So we did get some good news that no more no-match notices. By the way, $10 billion every year gets sent to the Social Security suspense account. That is money paid in by undocumented folks because you're deducting taxes and that is getting paid into the system. So we need to thank the undocumented also because otherwise, without their $10 billion a year contribution, Social Security would already be bankrupt.
And just very clearly, we do not suggest you send guns to the front of the restaurant. He was using a military example, and I just want to be real clear about that one. But there's two things, and again, I've had the privilege of working with these folks for so long. There's a couple of things I've learned that I want to make sure that they share out. So, Jacob, two things. One, can you give, here in Texas, can I give an I-9 in Spanish? And please explain that because that's a tricky one. And then the second thing is, as folks sit here and they hear you, they might think, maybe I should go back and do an I-9 audit. So if you could advise on that as well.
Great questions. First off, I-9 in Spanish is valid only in Puerto Rico. So don't complete it in Spanish, otherwise you will have to redo it in English. You can use the Spanish I-9 for illustrative purposes to show them how to complete section 1 of the I-9, but you can't have an I-9 in Spanish. Great question. That trips up a lot of employers. The second question was? Do
I go do an I-9 audit now that I'm scared?
Be careful. I would just say be careful about audits. Generally, I-9 audits can be good, but you don't want to start re-I-9ing folks unless you have to. That could spook your workforce. You could cause a panic. You have to be very careful about I-9 audits. If you have a doubt, call TRA. They can get in touch with with us, and we can walk you through that because the immigrant community is on edge right now. You could start a stampede if word gets out. Están revisando los documentos otra vez, and then you get people leaving, and then in this environment, where are they going to go? They're going to go to your competitors. So be careful about not causing a stampede. If you do get an I-9 audit, definitely get counsel. This is something that can cost a lot of money. The other thing is if you do get an I-9 audit, you have 72 hours in which you can correct I-9s, and you need to take advantage of that 72-hour grace period if you do get an I-9 audit.
So I want to pivot from that. We're going to go to Al, because Al, as a general counsel for what are some of the best practices that y'all deploy, knowing that you have such a diverse workforce?
Yeah, so as Jacob said, there's a list of hireable documents. We make sure our HR folks are familiar with those lists. The good thing is, as he mentioned, we don't have to be document experts. But as he says, if it says the Texas Department of Motorcycles, that's a clue, that's a problem. But, we take everybody at their face value. They come in, they apply. Of course, onboarding is now done all through a website and now through texts in many cases. But as long as we ensure that those documents are in the list that we're required to do, that they're signed appropriately and signed, then we maintain those documents and we get those folks to work as quickly as possible because the need is out there.
We really do need the help, and I think that's why I'm going to start right here with Zara. And what are some of the common misconceptions that we're hearing about either border refugees? And this sort of pivots to our TPS folks, because I know one of my favorite foods in the world is spring rolls, and Houston would not have spring rolls had we not had so many folks come over from Vietnam. And I'm thankful every day because that is my comfort food. But could you just help us with a little bit of understanding of what are the current laws that kind of go, and we're not lawyers. I see some lawyers in the audience. I've got two on the stage with me. But really just sort of a common misconception of what the rules are for somebody seeking asylum or a refugee status.
I'm glad you asked that also, because I think there's a lot of really harmful rhetoric that's all it is rhetoric. It's not policy proposals, it's not sensible solutions for the better of our communities. One of the things that I want to pull out from what you just said is we just concluded Immigrant Heritage Month, which we celebrate every June. And this year I was really excited because we were celebrating through my favorite thing, which is food. And we went on a cross-country tour with a food truck that was featuring different entrees from chefs who were either first generation and had a very recent immigrant heritage, learned to cook with their parents, and had some really delicious ethnic cuisine, right? Things that we are grateful for in this country. My favorite thing is chicken tikka masala, but as someone who has Mexican immigrant parents, I also really love enchiladas verdes. And so all of these things are contributions of folks who have come here either for seeking opportunity and a better life and contributing along the way, or it's folks who have been had to leave their home countries either because of violence or whatever that might be, but they've brought their traditions and culture with them in a way that's really strengthened the fabric of America. And so I think when we think about what does it mean to be American, that is a really core part of it. We are a nation of immigrants, whether your family came here recently or whether it was decades ago, but we all came from somewhere, brought our traditions here, and really made this country what it is. And I think anything that rejects that sentiment or fosters the opposite is really going against what we believe in as Americans. In terms of the current situation and what does our asylum system look like, it's really sad to say that we actually currently don't have a functioning asylum system. In fact, the previous administration shut down through various different things. I'm sure y'all have heard in the news things like Title 42 or the Remain in Mexico policy. But essentially what that did is it locked the process of seeking asylum, which is a legal human right, down. So folks were not able to come how they have traditionally to the border and basically begin to say, and they're doing this legally because they're not trying to avoid the system. They're coming and surrendering at the border and saying, I am seeking asylum in the US. Traditionally, they would have been processed. They would have had their opportunity to fight for their asylum case. The previous administration using several things, including COVID-19, to just essentially shut down the border and not allow anyone to even go through a legal process, meant that folks were just shut out and were actually stuck at the border on the Mexico side. And this was a huge humanitarian crisis. What this also meant is that, I mean, we're now 2, almost 3 years, time is fuzzy since COVID-19 happened, right? But we're talking about folks who have been waiting for their turn to be able to fight for their claim in court to say, I deserve asylum. And these are folks who have just been waiting this whole time. And so when you think about that, we need a functioning asylum system. The Biden administration has attempted to lift some of this, and it's been stuck in the courts many times with Texas challenging, which is extremely unfortunate just because, again, if we want sensible policies that work, that function, we need to provide those pathways, those legal pathways, and currently we don't have that.
Jacob, do you have any other thoughts? Because I know you work with so many different folks who have come in through an asylum process, or any other ideas or thoughts on that? Just because I think, like we were saying, there's a lot of misnomers out there, and we want to make sure folks, if somebody shows up at their doorstep and says, I want a job, and here's my paperwork, I'm an asylum seeker, that they know what is acceptable.
Well, I would just say you have to be careful. In Houston, we've had 50,000 Cubans that have come in over the last 8 years. A Cuban will come in on asylum. Generally, Cubans get the best treatment. They have better lobbyists than the Mexicans. What can I say? But they're going to get work authority immediately. They're going to become residents immediately. So you have to be careful as an employer about doubting a document, because you might think, well, you just came over, And how can you have work authority so fast? It is possible. So, again, it puts employers in a very delicate situation, because if you doubt a document, or if you say that they need an additional document when they've already presented one valid document, the employer is looking at a charge of discrimination. And under this administration, they are going after employers for document abuse. So employers really have to be careful. It's not just that we're telling you all, go ahead and hire people. That's the law. If the document looks good on its face and you don't have any knowledge otherwise, you need to hire that employee. Otherwise, you run the risk of a discrimination charge. So,
well, just let me be clear. You don't have to hire them just because they showed up and they had a good document. If you were willing to hire them and the documents meet your criteria or meet the criteria, go forward. If you look at the documents and you're like, I don't know, your name is Jesus, maybe not. That's where you get into trouble. So this is somebody who you've already made a job offer to, and now we're doing the paperwork. So be mindful of that.
Good point. Although, let's be honest, anyone who shows up is getting hired, right?
No, we require more than a pulse. Just a little bit. But I do want to allow some time at the end for some questions, but I want to put one more question to each of my panelists. And I think the question is, I'm sorry, I've got a question for each of y'all, but I want to give one really specific question first. And I'll start with you. What are a couple of specific things that we can do at the local, state, and federal level to have impact on helping us create this workforce of immigrants that we know are here? And the reason I say that is, overall, immigration and immigration reform is absolutely a federal issue. But we have seen tactics and things that we can do locally and that we can also do at a state level that can be very helpful. And it's not, for this conversation, it absolutely is about workforce, but it also has to do with human trafficking. If everybody can come out of the shadows, you don't have the people who can take advantage of them. So these things really do work hand in hand. And as much as I love Houston and Harris County, we have a couple of very bad number ones, and one of them is for human trafficking. So I always look at immigration reform and policies that can help with that. So can you help walk us through just a few local, state, and federal things, and then if y'all want to chime in on that as well?
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple of things, I think. It's about improving the quality of life, right? Where folks can have access to getting to work, doing things like going to the doctor, so that folks aren't just not able to show up for work when they're not feeling well, right? And so I'll just kind of start at the state level. There are certain states that have realized this is, at the end of the day, immigration is a federal issue, and what happens at the federal level trickles down into what states can do. But they've also realized immigrants are a critical part of our communities and our workforce, so we need to find ways to support that so that we aren't targeting them, or so that they aren't scared and running to another place where they'll feel safer, or they don't feel like they're going to be targeted. And so California and New York and Colorado all have in-state driver's licenses for their residents, regardless of immigration status. That means that folks now are able to apply for jobs. We had a trucker shortage here in Texas for a while. I believe that was about a year ago.
No.
I'm sure it's probably still, but I remember that being like a big news story, and folks were struggling. And if immigrants don't feel safe on the roads, they're not going to take those jobs, even though they're ready to be put to work. And so at the state level, we should be fighting for things like driver's licenses. And when I say fighting for them, I mean as business owners, you all have a really important voice, and our elected officials will listen to you and say, hey, this is important because this is impacting my workforce. And so that's something that we could do at the state level. At the federal level, I mean, Al is an incredible example of this. Folks who are understanding this because it's impacting their business, which at the end of the day impacts their livelihoods, impacts the community around them. You have a really important story to tell and a really critical voice in this moment so that our elected officials understand that this is a priority. We, as Jacob mentioned, this is an issue that has bipartisan support. there are Republicans, there are Democrats who understand, especially coming from Texas, that this is important and it needs to get solved. In terms of DACA, we had the Bipartisan Dream and Promise Act, which cleared the initial chamber, the House, and was going to be taken up on the Senate side. And we're waiting for that. But there was bipartisan support. We had the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which was also a bill that would have given farm workers and their families the opportunity to adjust their status if they were undocumented. That was a bipartisan bill. And so there is bipartisan support. I think what you all can do is really get involved. Al helped us pen an op-ed that was extremely successful in illustrating the workforce challenge that an outdated immigration system creates. And so doing things like that really helps us communicate that to elected officials, which hopefully will get folks in Congress moving.
Al, do you have any advocacy kind of suggestions?
So, we're the second largest employer in the country. And so get involved with the public affairs committees of the National Restaurant Association, the TRA. Go to your elected officials. Tell them how important this workforce is to your business. As I walked around yesterday throughout the day and I talked to many of these vendors, many of them have DACA recipients that are on their staff. And I think the average age of a DACA recipient coming to this country is somewhere around 6 to 7 years age. And so they're in every sector of our community: transportation, sanitation, hospitality industry, in every sector. And it makes such a tremendous impact on the economy that it's incredibly important for us as restaurant owners, restaurateurs, or in the restaurant industry to go to Austin, to continue to go to Washington, D.C., to impress upon the elected officials that without this segment of our community, we may not have a business very long.
Yes.
So that's what I'd suggest.
And if I can chime in really quickly to that, currently we have a really large number of undocumented kids who got here, went through grade school here, are graduating high school now. DACA they are no longer eligible for DACA because DACA was only for folks who came here within a certain time frame. And so what it also means for your industry is that there's going to be a ton of folks who are graduating, speak English fluently, have been basically raised here, are American in every sense of the word, but you can't put them to work. And that is a problem that is going to impact you all directly. So,
Jacob, do you have any other suggestions just for advocacy or actions?
Sure, I think we all need to remember that 20 years ago, gay marriage was, an idea. 20 years ago, legalized pot was an idea. Those two areas have gotten legalized, if you will. I mean, cannabis not in Texas yet, but I think the writing's on the wall. We need the last domino has to fall, and that's immigration reform. But it starts, I think it really starts with this industry, because the politicians come to our restaurants, they come to our events. We need to impress upon them how important immigration reform is. And we need people on both sides of the aisle here. They need to hear from us. They need to hear the economic argument. Oftentimes that gets lost when you see the media on the polar extremes. They just want to inflame the bases. But I think if our industry can talk to politicians about how needed immigration reform is, I think we can get that last domino to fall, because we really need it, and our industry will lead, and we'll get it done, hopefully.
Absolutely. So, just two quick facts. If you hear TRA or anybody from the National Association speak, you'll hear these a lot, but I love them, and I think they're important to share. First, 1 in 10 people in the United States works in our industry, whether it be restaurants or hospitality. That's amazing. We're 1 in 3, 1 in 4 first jobs across everything. That's amazing. We are the folks that will give you a job before you have anything on your resume. We let you become having a resume. But we're also seeing, and not just the post-COVID world, we were seeing this before. I know in my family and in my community, it didn't matter how much money you had. When you turned 16, you were getting a job. like, yeah, good luck, get out of the house, and you go, you know, if you want a car, you got to earn insurance on that. We're not quite seeing that now. We're seeing some different, and not only that, is our population's getting smaller. So a lot of our challenges in our industry, because we are so people intensive, and we want to be service intensive. We want that experience. And we can't give you that experience if we didn't get our delivery because there wasn't a driver, and there wasn't really a need for a driver because we didn't have anybody out in the processing plants to get the food. I mean, there's a huge trickle effect that this workforce shortage is really, we're feeling. And we know that our foreign-born workers can be a big part of that. And there's a lot of different options that can work for this. It could be a path to citizenship. It could just be good papers to come work so that you're not having to hide in the darkness. There's many options out there. There's not one that's going to solve everything that I think we could get past. I don't even know that we know what it is. But there is a great appetite on both sides. So please continue to carry that message, and you know, don't be afraid though. And so a lot of this, we gave you a lot of the ins and outs of the sort of the legals of it. But what I want to make sure everyone here understands is, don't be afraid of the foreign-born worker. Our foreign-born workers are our cornerstone. They're a huge part of our community, and there's many ways that get them very safely and very legally into your company to work. And so don't be afraid of that. And you know, if you're looking for more workers, immigration reform might be a way that you can get more. But it's a huge part. And again, like I said, I'm so thankful because, you know, my family way back may have brought over some Italian food, but I'm really thankful for the spring rolls and queso. So, you know. Any final comments from our panel before we open it up to questions? No?
I think
Is there any questions in the audience? I know this is what's word. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Hi, I wanted to thank the panel. I think this is wonderful information. It's helpful and insightful. My question is for you, Jacob. I think probably people have faced this. What do you do when you have an employee who comes to you and says, I know that person is undocumented? What should the employer do?
Great question, Alicia. And you know, it poses a real question. The answer is going to be, well, how do you know that person's undocumented? If they respond, well, everyone knows, or you know, I just know, I heard, then you don't have anything. I don't think you have a duty to take it much further, other than you want to make sure that I-9 is completed, that you do have an I-9 on that person. On the other hand, if they say, look, I know that he's undocumented because he asked me to pose as his wife and engage in marital fraud, now she's giving you a lot of information that you're going to have to investigate. So I guess the answer depends on how much details the complaint is. One issue that's very clear, if you get an anonymous complaint from someone that just says, hey, I know so-and-so's undocumented, there's no duty to take it any further than that. It gets a little trickier when the person comes forward and says, look, this is my name and that person is undocumented, because it may trigger an obligation to investigate further. But that scenario has happened because, believe it or not, there's drama at the restaurant. Great question, though.
Yeah.
Do we have any additional questions? All of our speakers will be here for a bit, and you'll find us around, so always feel free. My name again is Melissa Stewart. You can find me through the TRA. And just, you know, thank y'all for coming out. Thank you for helping our industry. Spread the message. If you can come with us to talk to local, state, or federal officials, that's great. As you have staff that needs support and you're not sure how to do it, reach out. We may have some really good help for them. And also recognize that your staff is who you know, but we know our staffs are our family. And if they have somebody in their home who is frightened and not sure what they can do because of a paperwork problem or any of that, reach out and see if we can get them connected. We have a lot of different organizations that can do work that we know of that we can help you refer to, just so that when there's a problem, everybody can show up and do well. One of the stories that sticks with me and just hurts my heart, frankly, every time is during Hurricane Harvey, Houston rightly had a curfew because it was weird, it was dark, and it was super wet. And we had a number of employees that were like, yes, I know I'm allowed to be out, and I have a letter from my boss that says I'm working, we closed at 10, I have until midnight to get home. They had all the things they need to be perfectly safe, but they were like, I'm not coming in because I'm fine, but what about grandma? What about Tio? And we just know that when our community, of all of the way we got here, when they don't feel safe, they don't participate, and they're not really being their true and best self, and that's what we want for everybody. And I think this, especially as hospitality. I see if there's one more question. Yes, ma'am, Allie.
Quick question, Jacob. With regard to electronic onboarding, and when it comes time to verify the I-9, and how, and really of printing those, let's say somebody leaves quickly, it turns fast, and printing that document and hanging on to it, how important is that for us to keep in a physical file versus just in the cloud that we've verified it electronically?
Great question. Well, there's different I-9 products out there that are on a digital format. The ones that have met ICE scrutiny are the best ones, but if it meets the USCIS standards, I mean, as long as it's capable of being retrieved for an audit, that's fine. More and more employers are going to a digital I-9. I love it because essentially it's idiot-proof if you complete it, if you go through all of the steps. So it is a good thing to do. Just make sure that the vendor you're using has been vetted properly. Most of them are compliant with USCIS and ICE, but it is one good trend because it won't let you complete the whole process unless you've completed every field, and that's important because before it was very common to see Section 1 not signed by the employee, or Section 2 partially completed by the employer. So this makes it idiot-proof. Good development that technology has given us. Great question. Oh, one thing about the mixed status, folks, most of the undocumented are living with folks that have status. So bear that in mind. If someone asks about immigration, maybe they're asking about a family member. I'm just trying to give you all some cover. Maybe they're asking about themselves, but remember not to learn too much information. I think all of you all have to have the name of a good criminal defense lawyer because your folks sometimes will call you, hey, I got a DWI, who can I go to? I think it's good to have a name of a good immigration lawyer that you can refer them to. Again, you don't want to learn too much information, but you don't want them getting ripped off by some notario. And by the way, notarios rip off employers too. Big case in Houston where I was involved in it. The employer, after an I-9 audit, asked us to go in and talk to its employees to see if any of them were eligible for relief. None of them were eligible for relief. We told him that. A year later, he calls me and says, Jake, I know you told me that there was no way to legalize those folks, but I talked to this notario, we paid him $120,000, and we haven't heard from him. So, I mean, it's out there. There's so many scams out there. The other thing is, the cartels now are smuggling people. They're getting into document, production. If we had a legalized system, we would bring it out in the open and put the cartels and document vendors and human smugglers out of business. So that's the other reason we need to reform.
A lot of bacteria dies in the sunshine, so.
Absolutely.
If there's no other questions, like I said, we're around. We really do appreciate y'all. And if you need anything, if you'll come to me, Melissa Stewart with the Texas Restaurant Association, I am, as I say, I'm not the person who can answer the question, but I'm the person who can get you to the person who can answer the question. Thank y'all so much. We appreciate y'all.